Now? Yeah, now. Okay, once more. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our panel on restoring the credibility of EU enlargement policy in the Western Balkans. I'm Ralf Fücks, the director of the Center for Liberal Modernity, Berlin-based think tank dealing with the domestic and international challenges to liberal democracy. I'm not an in-depth Western Balkan expert. Quite shortly jumped in to take over the role of the moderator. I've been very much engaged in the 90s in the Western Balkans, so I will restrict myself on the role really of a moderator. So only a very brief introduction, because we have a very complex topic, little time, and an impressive lineup of speakers. Obviously, over the last decade, the dynamics of the Western Balkans EU integration has stalled, and the credibility of the EU accession perspective have suffered significantly damage in the region. For some countries like Montenegro, the accession process started almost 20 years ago with very poor progress. With other countries, membership negotiations have been started only recently, and others are still kept in the candidate status. So we have a very differentiated situation, and this will be one of the topics. Can we talk about with the Western Balkans at large, or should we have a much more differentiated country-wise and merit-based approach? Now, with the Russian war against Ukraine and the geopolitical challenges the EU is facing, obviously time has come for a new attempt. And there are already some signals from the EU to restart the process. And we will discuss which problems and obstacles have to be addressed by the EU as well as by the candidate countries, and what should be done to restart the accession process and regain some real political dynamics. I would like to briefly introduce our speakers. You will find more information in the conference documents online. I will start with Monika Ladmanová. Welcome. She's the head of the representation of the European Commission in Czechia. To my right, Elmar Brok, a long-term member of the European Parliament, one of the, at least in Germany, heavyweights of EU policies. He now is the Vice President of the Institute of European Policy and member of the Presidium of the German Society of Foreign Policy. Welcome, Elmar. Agon Maliqi, he is policy analyst and media writer, co-founder of Spanka, and member of the International Coalition for Democratic Renewal from Kosovo. And last not least, for now, Srđan Cvibic, he is president of the Belgrade Center for Security Policy, coming from Serbia. And Guillaume Klossa will join us a little bit later, but we will not wait for him. I would like to start with asking first Madame Ladmanová and then Srđan to each briefly reflect from their perspective on the state of relations between the EU and the countries of the Western Balkans. Why has the process of EU accession lost momentum, and what should be done to revive it? Please.
Thank you, Ralf. Thank you for inviting me and the European Commission representative to have a voice in this debate. I would just have to remind ourselves that we are living in a very exceptional times. The times we are experiencing are clearly unprecedented. The geopolitical shifts which are around us means that everything what was the security in the world only recently just fell apart, and we have to adjust to the new realities. The Russian aggression against Ukraine was something like a wake-up call also for the European Union. And this brought a new impetus also for the enlargement process and for the Western Balkan and the discussions with the Western Balkan partners about the accession to the EU. Only yesterday there was a new impetus in terms of the Berlin process, which happened in Tirana. It was the 10th in the row, and there were some new agreements made between the partners at the Western Balkan and the European Commission. So I would say that we are now in the new momentum when it comes to relations between the Western Balkans and the European Union. And I truly believe that what everybody repeats at the EU level among the leaders, it's true that the Western Balkan belongs to the EU. So no loss of the credibility, I hope, but we can discuss it further.
So what would be your opinion? Should we have a more differentiated approach to this single countries, or should we treat them as a group?
For now, both paths we can observe. So there is an individual negotiations with the different countries, but there is also a call for more integrated regional market, mostly in the economic terms, but also in terms of migration and others. There is a lot of expectation when it comes to the relations between Kosovo and Serbia. Indeed, the de-escalation of the process, the return to the normalization process, the dialogue to be observed now in the future. So let's see, there is a lot of concerns, but there is also a lot of hope.
And what's about the internal homework the EU has to do? We will come back to this later. We have a debate about how far the accession process should be linked to internal reforms. There are different papers and approaches to this issue.
Indeed, indeed.
What is, in your view, the state of things here? Do you already perceive kind of political majority within the EU how to deal with this issue?
Indeed, there are tasks on both sides. That's also clearly stated by all leaders. It's not that it would go only one way around. There is a clear understanding that this two-way process means that we also, as a European Union and the member states, needs to go closer to the partners at the Western Balkan. The question is about the enlargement conditions and the revision of the enlargement process, which is ongoing. There is a clear understanding that it can be done without the revision of the treaties, which would be a painful process. Yeah. Everybody is aware of it. And it was clearly stated by President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, only recently, a month ago, that if there is a political will, it will happen.
And final question for the first round. Is there a position of the Commission regarding the accession process with Ukraine and Moldova? How far should it be in parallel with the Western Balkans, or should we treat it separately?
Now, I think this is clear from what is stated that it's a 30-plus momentum. So I think everybody is observing, everybody is waiting for the results of different reforms which needs to happen. There is now the new growth plan for the Western Balkan, which doesn't include Ukraine and Moldova. They have a different initiatives in place from the European Union. So I think that these two processes are going in parallel, but they are not necessarily linked together. And about your initial question about the merit-based process, I think that nobody ever questioned that it is a merit-based. But as you could also learn recently, there was an announcement that the rule of law report, which counts for the member states only so far, and there was a fourth year of the monitoring process in the EU member states, will be now also open for Western Balkan. So there are changes happening towards Western Balkans and new initiatives toward Western Balkans, which don't include Ukraine and Moldova.
Thank you very much. So, Srijan, the story from your perspective, and maybe you will also a little bit shed light on the, I would say, internal processes in the Western Balkans and how far these countries are responsible, or their domestic political dynamics have been contributed to the loss of momentum and credibility of the EU process.
Yeah. Well, the process lost credibility for one because it lasts such a long time. The shortest time span from the moment the country applied for membership to the moment it became a member was, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, in the case of Finland, it took them 3 years. In average, with the so-called Big Bang enlargement, it took them from 8 to 10 years. The Czech Republic, I believe, 8 years. North Macedonia applied for membership, well, started the whole process in 2004. And as my friend Nikola Dimitrov, former North Macedonian foreign minister, likes to say, is a veteran candidate country because it's already in the process for, almost 20 years. And if we take 2030 as the possible date for the first entries of these countries into the EU, it will take them 26 years. So it's just lasting a very long time. And
we know the games that Athens had been playing, and now
not only
Bulgaria is repeating.
Yes. Not only Athens, but to describe this process, and I agree with Ms. Ladmanová. The window, the door seems to be finally opening after so many years. But the problem is that no one believes it in the region. And to describe this, I would use the metaphor of the little boy crying wolf. You know the story, how it goes. Little boy cries wolf, there is no wolf. Everybody comes, he
finally
laughs.
the wolf comes and
nobody comes to save him because they don't believe it. So invert the wolf into a positive thing. The wolf being the EU membership. And, the EU gave so many times these signals that it's opening the door. It didn't happen. We had 2005 referenda in France and Netherlands. We had the world economic crisis. We had the migration crisis. Everything, every single time we hoped, okay, maybe now, if we do our homework, we can do it. There were stumbling blocks on the other side. So people just don't believe it, even if now it seems to be real. I think this is the essence of what's going on in the region, but it's not really only EU's fault. We have our own leaders that do not really believe in this process.
Do not really believe or are not really interested?
They're not really interested in that sense. I think they see it purely as a transactional thing, and they understand that if they do everything what they need to do to become members, they will not only no longer be in power, but most probably, like the former Croatian Prime Minister Sanader, in jail. So they don't have an interest, fundamental interest to push this. So what they do is they perpetuate this feeling within the population that the EU offer is not on the table. We had this in my country, Serbia, for the last 10 years. A daily drip of poisonous anti-Western propaganda from, guess whom, one of the main pillars of Western policy in the region, although a bit of a cynical policy, our president, Aleksandar Vučić. So basically, from the moment in 2009, when Serbia and then it was North Macedonia and Montenegro got the visa liberalization, the support for EU membership in Serbia was 70%, around 70%. Now it dropped to 46%. Which is not bad in comparison to what was being done to undermine it,
So, and who could become driving forces for reviving the EU accession and the whole perspective? Yeah, to whom should the EU and should we then address? If, of course, it's different from country to country, but partly the leadership is not really interested, the elites, because they are very comfortable with the status quo. So who could become the engine?
First of all, they're not all the same.
Yeah.
There are political leaders in the region that truly believe in this process. They have their own issues, complicated majorities, why they cannot push it fast. But I wouldn't say that they're all the same. Second, to answer directly to your question, the people communicate more to the people and to the pro-democratic, pro-EU forces in the countries, truly pro-democratic and pro-EU forces. I do not believe that, you know, anything you mentioned a bit in the introductory remarks, the sovereignty and territorial dispute between Serbia and Kosovo. Well, do not think that what was being taught for the last 10 years, that autocrats can resolve such a problem. First democracy, then these problems will be solved. Without a democratic Serbia, that is the biggest country in the region, nothing will be solved.
Thanks a lot. Agon, I would like to invite you to step in.
Sure. I agree with most of what Srdjan said. The problem is that over the past decade, we did not really have an enlargement process. We had more of a containment policy towards the Balkans. And it's not the fault of the Commission. It was mostly member states. The EU, for internal reasons, put a stop on enlargement and just basically try to make sure that, prioritize security concerns. And in that sense, this kind of led to this working with strongman leaders approach. So we did not have, and this created a lot of disillusionment in the region, in the progressive forces all over the Balkans. If you look, everybody, the people who are most pro-EU are the most disillusioned with the EU. So this question of who is to blame, I think is, it's a chicken and egg kind of discussion. In Brussels, they like to do a lot of Balkan bashing. In the Balkans, we do a lot of EU bashing. There's a lot of nuances there, but since I'm from the Balkans, I will focus mostly on the EU because we relied on the EU a lot. The transformative process of enlargement, we relied on it as an anchor for democratization, as an anchor for peace building. The reason why Kosovo and Serbia have not resolved the dispute so far is also because we lost that EU perspective in the sense of, borders will no longer matter. There are incentives for everyone to behave. Conditionality was not as effective on Serbia and on Kosovo.
So it's a lack of incentives?
Absolutely. So it just drove everything in the wrong direction. So this is now the problem if we're talking about reviving enlargement. It's not that we will continue from a point where we stopped 10 years ago. The problem is that we will continue from a point of even worse point. So we've deteriorated, especially in democratic standards, especially in Serbia, and especially in terms of geopolitical context. So things have gotten much worse. The people who are most pro-EU are the most disillusioned. So it will be incredibly hard for the EU to restore credibility. And for those, you ask the right question. So who will be the driver? So how does this now restart? Does it come from the Balkans, or does it come from the EU? There are some positive signals, but we'll have to see it to believe it. To be honest, the key problem being, at this point, Vučić and Serbia have become like a real obstacle to everyone. They are engaged in this geopolitical blackmailing of the West, holding all of the region sort of hostage to that geopolitical blackmail. And in a lot of other countries, you have disillusionment in terms of how member states are using the enlargement process for bilateral disputes, North Macedonia being the prime example. So, it's no longer about Copenhagen criteria. It's about history in the case of North Macedonia. In the case of Kosovo, we will only in January 1st next year have visa liberalization. So we were way back even on that issue. So to get people to think about Europe and think about it's increasingly difficult. And in Kosovo's case, there's also the issue of lack of unity within the EU, with the 5 member states not recognizing. Just to get to the issue of how difficult it is to resolve the Kosovo-Serbia dispute, we used to rely on the EU perspective kind of being the anchor for that, But now you have the EU moderating a dialogue between a country that does not want to enter the EU, which is Serbia, and a country like Kosovo that can't because of non-recognizers. So it effectively makes the EU powerless, and it effectively makes conditionality worthless. So we're kind of stuck in this position of how to revive this.
Thanks a lot. You mentioned history as a factor now, which is playing out, and we have a lot of unresolved historical conflicts, or let's say conflicting narratives about history in the Balkans, including, as we have seen, Greece and Bulgaria, and so. What do you think? Should this problem be addressed specifically, or can we just overcome it if we can recreate a kind of dynamics in?
You mean the Kosovo-Serbia dispute?
Yeah, not only that.
I think because EU enlargement is so distant, it feels still so distant, and even if it restarts in some format, it will still take a lot of time. And there's now talk about sort of gradual accession, first maybe single market or inclusion into certain sectors. I think the priority should be NATO expansion first. It was clear that with what happened now in Ukraine, while EU enlargement had stopped in the Balkans, NATO expansion did not. So in the meantime, you had Montenegro and North Macedonia join NATO. If they hadn't, the Balkans would have been a really, really big problem right now in this particular context. So I think that needs to be sealed off while the EU enlargement process is kind of stalled. So Kosovo and Bosnia and Herzegovina primarily, because they feel the most threatened in this context. And secondly, I think Europe needs to look at the Balkans from a more strategic security perspective. Yes, the countries of the region are not ready to join, and we are fully aware of that. But a lot of other countries were not maybe fully ready when they did. But we can see the benefits now. I mean, here, look at, maybe not Czechia, but we can feel the benefits now in the Balkans of being surrounded by EU and NATO. If we weren't surrounded by EU and NATO in the current geopolitical context, you would have had most likely a new front of the war in the Balkans right now. Yeah. So I think we need to sense that, capture this geopolitical momentum and this security paradigm, call it a bandwagon with Ukraine, and understand that it's in Europe's security interest to prioritize and speed up these things, resolve Kosovo-Serbia dispute, prioritize NATO expansion while EU accession kind of progresses slowly. Because while the conflict has not spread, we've shown some resilience. There was an attempt to instigate an armed insurgency by Serbia in Kosovo just a couple of weeks ago. But the presence of NATO and the fact that NATO is all around was a factor of resilience. So we need to strengthen those factors because maybe last time it did not succeed. But considering the cascade of wars that are happening, there's no guarantee that there won't be a spillover in the Balkans.
Thanks a lot. Finally, Elmar Brok, as a veteran of EU policy, what is your assessment and what would be your recommendations?
I was the other day on a panel in Dubrovnik with former leaders or the present leaders of the Western Balkans. And as I closed my eyes there in the debate, I thought I would be 10 years ago, the same debate, the same words. But that is the responsibility of both sides. The European Union prepares every year a progress report, called progress report, without any progress in reaching the goal. it's not told the truth to the candidate countries where the reforms have to be to fulfill the criteria. Here must be less diplomatic language on negotiating tables to make it clear, and that not a narrative starts that because of historical reasons, because of particularly fights in countries, fights between countries on the Western Balkans, they are not ready, or as you mentioned rightly, they are not interested.
Some of them.
Some of them.
Yeah.
It happens sometimes, then it's the other party in that country, then we have such a story. So it's not just blame the European Union and it's the lack of credibility of the European Union. Their own responsibility they put on the shoulders of the European Union. But that does not diminish the responsibility of the European Union, to make it clear. First, I was main rapporteur of the European Parliament in the enlargement round 2004-2007. We used a merit-based method, because only then, or we called it at that time, the regatta principle. That is the reason, because only if you say, I take them as a group, nobody will do anything. So you need a pressure of competition to become forward. The second point is, because it is now, of different reasons, so complicated, we have to show to the people of such countries progress. We talk only about the final membership. You mentioned rightly Finland 2 years, or Austria or Sweden. But they had different stages.
Points of department.
After European Economic Area, if you have the European Economic Area, part of the internal market, you have solved already 70% of the key of the common legal system. And therefore, we should not only talk about the end, which have to be reached, but do steps now that the people see and feel progress. And nobody talks about that. Neither the Commission. The European Parliament has made such proposals 10 years ago already, but the Commission never followed that. Some member states were happy about it, there's no progress. And Austria and France need now a referenda in order to have a so-called safeguard. And I think here things have to become, have to go forward. And what we need is also, perhaps we can debate it later, the integration capacity of the European Union, which is part of the Copenhagen criteria. Sometimes it's forgotten. And here we have to find the right way. And therefore, let's start with, that it also belongs to Ukraine and others, let's start with progress people will feel. And be on that basis, go forward. The example, Austria, Finland, Sweden, is they used the European Economic Area as the basis for going up, like in the Himalaya. Others, like Norway, made a decision that's enough for us. Make such an approach with some intelligence and some fantasy, and not debate without any progress, which I can see at the moment.
Let's come back to the reform issue, the EU reform issue a moment later. So as far as I got it, you would advocate for a kind of gradual process. I just learned that the foreign minister of North Macedonia started an initiative, internal market first, institutions later, so to restart kind of like real dynamics, to achieve real progress.
It's a good initiative by her.
Yeah. So how would you see that? All or nothing, or stepwise?
I think it depends where you come from in the Western Balkans, you know.
A little bit. Speak up a little bit.
I think this move. I think it depends where you come from in the Western Balkans, you know. you come from, I don't know, a country where the population doesn't truly believe that there is this perspective coming very soon. And for example, in Serbia, you know, the most staggering data is not the 46% for only 46% for EU membership, but that the vast majority of the population don't believe that this day will ever come. So if you ask them, maybe, you know, if the political elites sell it, maybe it could work. But try talk to Montenegrins about that thought that they can enter very soon, and now propose them staged accession. It causes quite a lot of commotion. So, you know, depends of the perspective, really.
Madam Ladmanová.
I think it was Agon who mentioned that this whole accession process and then the membership, it's a transformative moment for every country who went through it and who is in it. So for the Western Balkan, if it's the economic progress, I'm not sure, but we can see that there is a lot happening through different subsidies. There are new roads, new railways, new energy plants, new everything. Now, the new initiative on the growth plan, it has a capacity to double the economic growth in the region within 1 decade. So these will be the concrete deliverables, but I don't know if it's enough. The other tangible result, I think it was also mentioned, it's the current peace in the region. It is fragile, of course, given the Kosovo-Serbia situation, but still, as you've mentioned, given the whole context in Europe, I think that people might feel that they are safer than they would be without this accession process. So I'm not sure what answer to give you, what the people need to feel, to be again on the path. Yes, we all want to be in the EU. In the Czech Republic, the country I know the best, we are also observing a lot of frustration within 20 years, which we are celebrating only next year. And when there was a referendum in 2004, 84% of population voted for the accession. Today, we don't want to have a referendum, let's put it this way.
And what is your explanation for that?
It's a $1 million question. There was a lot of debates about it and research about it. Of course, there was also the role of the leaders in a way how it was presented to the public, the benefits of the EU membership. I think that the Central Europe can serve as a good example, because what we are observing only these days around in the Central Eastern European region, it is some kind of a historical developments which are not repeating itself, but at the same time can be taken as a lessons learned.
But would you think that, or would you guess that it's primarily a matter of socio-economic problems or lack of socio-economic progress, or do we observe a general trend, I would say, a renaissance of national sovereignty?
Interestingly enough, there is enough of the social economic progress, even though it might not feel so to certain individuals. But as I said, it's more complex on deciding or on finding conclusion why the numbers for the support to the EU are going ups and down. For example, during COVID times, we could see the increase of the trust into the EU, and it was because there has been an unprecedented measures taken together, and lives were saved, etc. Then it went down again during the beginning of the Russian aggression against Ukraine. The numbers went up again because of the security reasons. So I think that it is a question of the individual feeling,
of the added value
and
of
the basic
being member of the European community.
Indeed. And there has been a lot of changes, as we said. There are a lot of exceptional situations we went through in the past 4 years. So the Commission, which has the current mandate, led by the President Ursula von der Leyen, I think that what they were facing and how they were solving the so-called crisis if I may say. It really became a true geopolitical commission, and we can just discuss what it will lead further, also in the relations with the other parts of the world, but I think it's for another debate.
Thanks a lot. So welcome, Guillaume. Finally, you just arrived at the right moment, because you wrote me that you would prefer especially to talk about the Franco-Allemande expert paper on the enlargement process and how it should be linked to internal reforms. Up to now, we mainly have been talking about why did the accession process more or less collapse, and what is the responsibility of the EU, and what are the responsibilities of the specific countries, and how to revive it. But now it comes to the tricky question: which kind of homework has the European Union to do to be ready for taking in maybe 8 or 9 additional countries within the next 10 years?
Well, I think there are several things. 6 years ago, with Elmar, Brok and a series of European leaders, we prepare a roadmap for European Renaissance, and we prepare a report at the request of President Juncker and President Tusk about the next step of the European Union. And one thing which is very important is Europe needs to prepare its next step with or without the enlargement. The enlargement. And this is very important, because we know that the European project has been designed in a post-war period, where our security was managed by the Americans, where the main driver of globalization after the fall of the wall was trade, when technologies were not so important. And everything has changed. We have a radical shift. And Europe is not designed for that. Europe is not designed for that. We were efficient with the crisis, and the Commission, from a legislative role, they started to develop an executive role. But this is not in the treaty. And this can be done once, twice, but not all the time. So we need to adapt the European Union to a new reality. And what also needs to be very clear is that there is also a strong citizen expectation. You spoke about surveys, Eurobarometers, but if we look at the last year, the last 5 years, more or less, since the British referendum, I mean, the levels are very high. Okay, they go up and down, but they are very, very high. They are beyond 65, 70%. And the level of trust with regard to the European institution in most of the member states is higher than the level of state with regard to the national institution. So we need to have that in mind. And the last point, and I will answer your question, the last point is that when you speak to European citizens as European citizens, they react as European citizens. When you speak to European citizens as national citizens interested by Europe, they react as national citizens. So if you ask the same question, the answer won't be the same.
But I would say this is the inherent dynamics of the European Union to be at the same time a union of citizens and a union of states.
Exact.
Yeah?
So if you ask a citizen to think as a member, as a national, he will answer as a national. If you ask him to think as a European citizen, he will answer as a European citizen. And somehow this is a success. It means that somehow, and there are many surveys which show that we have developed at the level of the EU a kind of European society. And just a last detail, because in my country, sometime in Germany, very often we consider that the real pro-European are French, are German, etc. I'm traveling all the time, and I can tell you that in most of, between comma, the new members, we have very strong pro-European. And one very pro-European country is Poland. Just to remember that 10 years ago, the Polish Minister of Foreign Affairs, under Tusk, had proposed a kind of federalization of the foreign policy. And who say no, or who neglect the proposal, it was the French.
So, okay.
Now to speak about enlargement and the report. What is very important is the following. I think we consider in France and Germany that we need to enlarge. There is a geopolitical issue, there is a democratic issue, there is a security issue. So we need to enlarge and we need to include the Western Balkans. Second thing, according to what I understand from this report, we don't want a two-level approach. On the one side, Ukraine, and on the other side, the Western Balkans. According to the report. I don't say this is the will of the politician, but according to the report. And third thing, in the report, there is a date. But might be not realistic, but there is a date, which is 2030, to launch the process. And this date is, at the same time, relatively far to give a momentum so that the transformation, the reform, be implemented, and relatively close to be considered as a strong commitment.
Okay, so I think there is more or less general consensus that we should not touch the treaties, and reforms should be conducted below that critical threshold. But which kind of reforms do you think are the most urgent ones to secure the ability of the Union to act, to make decisions, and to act as a political power?
I'm not as sure as I might have been some time ago upon the fact that we have not to touch the treaty. I think we need to adapt the treaty because for a certain number of competences, they need to be updated. So it means that maybe we need a targeted reform of the treaty. Maybe we can use the enlargement treaty to make this reform, but we will have to adapt the treaty. That's my conviction. It was not my conviction 5 years or 6 years ago. I really believe that the potential of the Lisbon Treaty was not used and that we should leverage it. But I think there is this point.
So adoption of the treaties as a precondition for accession?
I think if we don't reform the treaty, well, and the reasons for reforming are not only enlargement, there are other, Europe will dysfunction. So I really believe we need, for me, it would be better it to be a precondition. But it means that we have little time to do it if we really want to do it. But the main thing is not only reforming the treaty, we need to have a European budget. Because we add a series of responsibilities to the EU without the budget. And this is dysfunctional.
Okay, so Elmar Brok, and then I will take over to our speakers from the Western Balkans. I'm very interested how this debate is resounding in your brains. Elmar, would you still stick to the old formula of an ever closer union in terms of the transition of political competences, political power to the EU institutions? Or do we have to rethink what European integration will mean in the future?
You can do a lot without the European Union, but to have a European Union with the internal market, you need the treaty and the legislation.
Yeah.
And legislation for all of them. There might be, as the law called it, the core group which starts, but openness for all the others to join, as is done in certain policies. But we did, between the Maastricht Treaty, which came into power in 1992, which was also reformed towards political competences, political union, as a result of the German unification, 4 intergovernmental conferences to reform the European Union for the enlargement round 2004. Amsterdam, Nice, Constitutional Treaty, Lisbon. And we said in the beginning, deepening before widening, the compromise was deepening and widening. But since then, we have no ambition in the Council and since the last elections in the Commission for any further progress. And in that institutional way to make the European Union more efficient. And that is the main point why within the European Union, people are not satisfied with the European Union because of the inefficiency of decision-making powers. And if we do not become better there, we lose also our own members in the European Union, the citizens in our European Union. And therefore, we have to do 2 ways, parallel. First of all, there's a lot of points which can be developed within the present treaty. Even a sort of majority voting for foreign and security policy, which is written in that.
So
I made myself, it was my last report in the European Parliament of that 2019. And here we have to do much more to make it more efficient. And that must be the Commission President, it must be led from the Council. Why we have a Council President who does not act? Then we do not need a Council President and can come back to the old solution that the national Prime Minister takes over the European Council every half a year. Might be even better. And we have, the Commission President has also no interest in that because of different reasons which would lead us too far when I would explain it. And but then at the same time, we have to look in the further construction of the European Union. I believe that can be done. The enlargement, we have serious negotiations, including Ukraine. It needs 3-4 years. Then we have the ratification process, which is difficult in some member countries. And in that time, we have now 5 years possibility to discuss the reforms of the European Union seriously, without treaty changes and with treaty changes. But the European Union, with 35 member countries, with the veto principle, total veto principle, and foreign security and defense policy. Defense policy is a disaster, what we do. The European Union member states spend every year 300 billion euros for defense, with a ridiculous result, while they do not cooperate with each other. Now the Finns and Poles buy the tanks in Korea, because we are not able to come to a solution to that. We have to do it, for example, in tax policies, which is internal market related. The Apples and others run without paying taxes our economy. We have to find majority voting to have taxes on that, which cannot be done naturally in order to protect our economic environment.
But majority voting can be done within the current treaty framework.
The financial figure, probably not, but a certain progress in foreign security policy. There are several ways. And there is also the passerelle in the present treaty. The passerelle, which still needs anonymity, but is not a treaty change and does not need ratification in national parliaments.
Exactly.
Okay,
And that
so
is the very important point. So we have to use every possibility to go forward. And if we have the pressure, we need enlargement because of geostrategic reasons and credibility and so on. Please, if you want to do that, then we have to make progress here to, and please start to talk about, do not hope that the candidate countries do not fill the criteria.
Elmar, we have still 9 minutes, so I would like
that
to...
That was my second question you gave.
No, please, I would like to introduce now our friends from the Western Balkans to the debate.
Yeah, we're talking about credibility of the EU, and I think if we now focus, on the issue of whether there needs to be a treaty change first before enlargement, I think that would send a very bad signal. We've already had this in 2017, I think, with Macron stating that first there will have to be internal reform and then enlargement, and I think that...
I can make one remark.
Yeah.
That it was also the biggest sin by Angela Merkel never to respond to Macron's Sorbonne speech.
So,
a big mistake.
So,
there are bigger sins.
So in this
there are even bigger sins.
In this context, to open this up, this will damage the EU's credibility. I think it's really important for the EU to send a strong message if it wants to, the Balkans will go in, and if there's a date, that is great. But I think what needs to happen, especially from the process part, is on the issue of QMV, for example. The enlargement methodology was reformed a couple of years ago. With these clusters and also the issue of reversibility, so a country can move forward but then also be brought back. But what it did, it created a lot of landmines in the enlargement process, enabling member states to block at whatever stage. So for example, QMV during the enlargement process, of course the membership itself will have to be voted by all member states in the end stage, but during the enlargement process it will help if there is QMV so that individual member states do not block for, like what Bulgaria is doing right now. So to eliminate the space for these blocks, I think this will help a lot. It will make the process more credible. The growth plan that von der Leyen presented in Tirana yesterday, some of the elements of it, infrastructure funding, is definitely used. People definitely need to see more of the EU, more tangible benefits. And she also mentioned tying more of that money with reforms. But I think the two types of reforms that should be prioritized by the EU in this process are the fundamentals, of course, rule of law, but also common foreign and security policy. You cannot have an EU member candidate country play geopolitical blackmail like Alexander Vucic is doing. Like that is totally, it cannot be acceptable. So if we have that, I think you can restore a little bit of credibility, maybe not entirely, but if until now the EU has, I would say, had, instead of having a transformative effect, it has actually had a negative effect in the Balkans over the last 10 years, at least it can try to not do too much damage to the democratic forces in the region, and at least try to find ways within the current treaty to reward reforms, to incentivize, and I will end here. I will agree with your point that some of the countries that are doing better should be rewarded to move forward. You have countries like Albania and Kosovo where 90% of the people or even more are pro-EU. Why not move ahead with these countries, or Montenegro, or North Macedonia, which is waiting for the longest? These countries deserve to move forward, but they need a credible process in which they are not blocked regularly by some things that have nothing to do with the Copenhagen criteria.
You made a very interesting point when you are talking about internal reforms of the EU and how it should be retrofitted, strengthening the rule of law mechanism, to guarantee the basics of European democracy also after the point of accession.
Absolutely.
Now, Switcher.
I don't know if you want to open the floor for questions, because I can...
It was clear that we cannot do it with 5 panelists and 1 hour of time.
Well, I mean, a lot of what I wanted to say was already said. I mean, you don't need... I don't know actually what's a scarier prospect politically, having a referendum, or hopefully not referendum, but voting Congrès in France on the enlargement to certain countries, or the treaty change, Otherwise, because yes, there is a passerelle clause. I have been advocating for the introduction of QMV for so many times. I mean, but when I'm thinking about actually what what at the end of the day needs to happen is parliaments, or in some cases referendum, would need to ratify the Treaty of Accession for future member states. So finally, maybe this will come together.
Guillaume.
I really believe the EU competences are not anymore relevant with regard to the time. And there are a certain number of things which were not in the Lisbon Treaty, which should be added to the Lisbon Treaty, maybe targeted. Let's avoid to say we are not going to redo a treaty. We are going to adapt a treaty, which is very different, but to adapt significantly this treaty. And the fact is, if you want to have a bargaining power to adapt, you need to manage the couple enlargement reform. And this is not easy. So this is very political. And this you need to understand, because we really need to change rapidly the EU if we want it to remain relevant. I just want to give you one example. I'm French. My country considers itself to have a great foreign policy. But now it's completely inefficient. If you look at, no, but let's speak frankly, if you look at the foreign policy of the UK, it's nothing. I mean, after Brexit, they disappeared. They can be useful from time to time, but they are just followers.
Guillaume, 1 minute.
No, but it's important, because reality has changed radically, and we need to adapt ourselves to this new reality. Otherwise, the new member will belong to a weak community. And what we have to do, and it's discussion we have with Elmar when there was a Brexit, is we need to really create a transnational European democracy which articulates the community level with the national level.
But this is a totally disputed model.
No, but we can go ahead. There are so many topics on which we have been ahead, which were not considered as realistic 5 years ago.
Guillaume, now I have really to be brutal and to stop you, because I would like to invite Monika for a final statement.
I will be quick. Speaking about the passerelle clause, during Juncker Commission, there were 3 attempts proposed to member states to use it for different types of policy, including the taxation policy, including the anti-discrimination issues. It never went through the member states, but it was during the peaceful times. And I think the crucial word here is adaptation, as you said. The EU proved itself, and this is a good news, to be able to adapt. Look what happened after the Russian aggression against Ukraine. The unity which has been kept within the EU member states is unprecedented. I truly believe that if there is a political will, as it was stated, there will be enlargement process, even without the treaty change, or with the treaty change, which will happen without the lengthy discussion we experienced during the last attempt in 2010. That would be my last word.
Thanks a lot. Unfortunately, we have consumed our time, but just entering the big issues, then finally about the future of the European Union, I think they are within the EU are very different and partly controversial ideas about what the European Union should be about in the future, especially the relationship between member states and the European institutions. I totally agree that we have to push these discussions to decisions, but I would strongly recommend to focus on that what must be done necessarily and can be done in the next 7 or 8 years without creating the huge obstacles for new member states. Yeah? And especially in the case of Ukraine, this is of such urgency to get Ukraine a real perspective to become member of the European Union, we cannot postpone that until we are united about the finalité of the European Union. So I leave it with that. Thanks a lot to our panelists, and thanks to you for your interest. Thank you very much.
Thank you.